Hello, my name is Mark Adamson. I'm an attorney who deals with special education. I made this presentation to help parents sort of have a better understanding on how they can have a better relationship with their children's schools. The reason why I developed this was because I noticed that when parents end up getting information about what their rights are, a lot of times they end up getting a little confused, and they, usually when a parent feels that something's wrong with their children's special education, something is wrong, but it's usually not the thing that they think is wrong. And I think that the best way for me to sort of illustrate some of this information is by sharing with you a little bit of a story of mine. It's a story of me in law school. When I was in law school, I ended up applying for accommodations, and there were a list of accommodations that had been recommended to me from a school psychologist, and I had all of the supporting documentation about it. And then I ended up filling out and submitting this information, and it got denied. I was sort of shocked because the reason for denial ended up being that I was too smart to have a learning disability, which is really frustrating because there just seems to be something inherently wrong where they're telling me that you have to be stupid to have a learning disability. And that really got me mad. And so I ended up filing an appeal, and I did win the appeal. And I ended up getting accommodations. So after I ended up filing an appeal, it took forever to get these accommodations granted. I ended up getting so angry because I had an experience at UCLA where everything had been handled appropriately, and I had this amazing experience that was super supportive and super helpful. But here I am in law school, working with people that know the law better than anyone, and they're not following it. And so, like I said, I got angry, and when I got angry, I did what a lot of people that do are angry. They end up throwing people under the bus. I was self-righteous. I knew that I was right. I knew that I was right and everyone else was wrong. And so what did I do? I ended up going and fighting the good fight. I ended up showing people that they were wrong, and I wasn't afraid about how I told them or what I told them because I was right and they were wrong. Now, let me skip ahead. One of my professors ended up telling me after these things had evolved past a certain point that maybe I should hire an attorney. I did, and there was a little bit of litigation that ended up occurring, and I won. And the next year, when I ended up returning afterwards, I ended up discovering that everything had changed. Even though I had won, I had destroyed every relationship that I had with the administration. I was treated like someone who was a problem. And it wasn't that they were treating me or giving me something that was 100% wrong. I just felt weird. I ended up having to fill out a form for the law school where I had been asked to fill out whether anything had changed. And so I had went to back to the same educational psychologist, and she had told me, of course things have changed. You found out that you have all of these different problems in this unique environment, and so we're going to end up, you need to have these types of supports. So I ended up bringing that back to the law school, and I was really frustrated about this. I just wanted her to say nothing had changed, but stuff had changed. And so I ended up filing for, saying that this was what accommodations I needed, and then they were rejected again. I was so frustrated. I ended up deciding, hey, you know what, I'm going to appeal this. I appealed it. I lost. I appealed it again. I lost. I went all the way to the top of the university, and then I lost. I didn't know what I was going to do. So frustrated. And then one day, and this is the key of the whole story, I ended up going to one of my classrooms, and my professor that day was teaching us about something called mediation. And I knew what mediation was, but I didn't really understand what it was. And it was at that day that I ended up finding out through seeing a mock mediation that there's a way to solve your problems where you don't focus on right and wrong. You can actually talk about why, and you can seek out a solution that ends up being successful. And the cliche is a win-win solution for both people. The story that my professor ended up sharing with us is from a book called Getting to Yes. I'd highly recommend it, and I have a link for it in the video description for you. In this story, there's a mother, has 2 daughters, and they're fighting over an orange. If the mother would have decided that she was going to give the orange to one of the daughters, then it would have been a win-lose situation. If she would have decided that she was going to split the orange in half, well, neither of the daughters would end up getting what they wanted, and they would get half of it. So there's a compromise. But then the mother did something. She asked the girls, why is it that you want this orange? And one of the daughters ended up saying, well, I want the orange to eat it. The other one said, I want the orange to bake a pie. And that she needed to have the pill of it. And so the mother ended up deciding, hey, one gets the pill, the other gets the orange. And both of them are happy. Now, I know this is a dumb, super, just silly story that, how many orange pill stories are there in life? But it affected me. And so right after that class, I walked across the hallway and I asked to make an appointment with the dean. And the dean was sitting right by his secretary, and he opened up the door and he was like, hey, Mr. Adamson, why don't you come in? I have some time. I ended up sitting down and I asked him, hey, do you know why it is that I'm asking for these things? And he was like, well, I think I do. And I was like, okay, well, I just had this experience in my class dealing with mediation and problem solving. And after I ended up hearing this, I thought, maybe I should come over and show you what it is that I really need help from. Because I care about law school. I care about gaining an education. But there's some problems that are impeding me. And so there were a couple of different things, but one in particular was the ability to have a staff member review my prepared writing, like essays and papers that were done outside of class for grammar and clarity issues. I have some difficulty dealing with grammar and syntax. And so I asked them, hey, do you see how it would be helpful for me to actually learn how to be a better writer, because I struggle as being a writer. And if I had this feedback, it would help me and I would become a better attorney. I would become smarter and I would know the things that I needed to do. And then he told me, well, the problem with that is I feel like you're going to get an unfair advantage over your classmates. I'm like, look, honestly, I have to tell you, I don't care about an unfair advantage. All I care about is getting an education. And then it was then that I had my first orange pill moment. I had told him, you know what, maybe we can both win in this situation. Maybe I could go ahead and get the feedback and the input of my professors on my writing. But in my writing classes, there are only a couple of them out of about 20 classes I had taken in law school. Maybe I could take those pass, no pass. That way I wouldn't get a competitive advantage, but I would learn how to write and I would be able to gain the experience. Let me tell you, the entire relationship changed at that point. All of a sudden I ended up going from this extremely hostile environment to where the dean told me, hey, you know what? I'm sorry that the faculty, you've had this experience. And that faculty have been treating you a little bit differently. And I told him, I understand that. I understand. Look, I made things difficult for people. I didn't think about how they would feel and how, professionally, how it would affect them if I threw them under the bus. I didn't think about the relationship that had to occur. And he really was appreciative of the fact that I was showing, being an adult over this. And so he told me, from now on, I want you to come to me for the rest of your law school career. If you have any problem, if you just need to talk, come to me and I'll help you out. That's what I want to teach you how to do today. I want you to figure out how you can start working with your child's school instead of fighting with them. Because when you fight, you end up burning bridges. And when you burn a bridge, imagine if your kid is in kindergarten and you burn that bridge now, you're going to be dealing with these people for a very long time. And just because you get this problem solved doesn't mean that you're going to be able, that you're not going to face an additional 10, 15, 20 problems. There's always a problem, and you always have to be able to work together. So that's what I'm going to do. All right. So before I end up getting into the nuts and bolts of this presentation, I just basically want to go over and make sure that you understand the core concepts that are involved in special education. Everything in special education is governed by something called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it changed everything. All of your rights as a parent are given to you through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It's known as the IDEA Act. Pretty cute. Before this act was passed, under the ADA, under Section 504, you ended up having some rights, but those rights really only gave you access to an area. It didn't give you meaningful access, so it didn't give you the ability to have an enriching environment. But with the Individuals with Disabilities Act, we decided that children with disabilities are someone that we need to educate, that we need to give them opportunities in life to be able to be better people and to be educated members of society. The Individuals with Disabilities Act ends up saying that each child is entitled to a specialized education that is uniquely tailored to their special needs. And the way that we do that is something that I'm sure you're familiar with, or about to be. It's through the development of an individualized education program, mostly known as an IEP. Now, what this ends up doing is it ends up saying and describing in specific detail what it is that the school's going to do to educate your child. And what they're developing is something that's called making sure that the IEP gives your child a free and appropriate public education. What it ends up meaning is exactly what it says. Your child's entitled to a free education. You can't be asked to pay for it. It needs to be appropriate. It actually has to be an education. Now, what level of education that it needs to be is a little bit outside the scope of this presentation, but I will be going over some of that in different ones. Now, it needs to be a public education, which ends up meaning that the schools themselves have this obligation. It's no one else. And this education has to occur in the least restrictive environment. Now, this is important because what we know from racial segregation, separate but equal is not equal. If we end up working with these children in segregated facilities, they're not going to have the benefits of their typical developing peers. They're not going to be able to have these positive role models that can model the behavior that hopefully they'll be able to develop. And so being in the least restrictive environment is really a huge benefit that parents are given. I would imagine that you probably would rather have your teeth pulled before having to attend another IEP meeting. That's the wrong way to look at this. Look, you care about your kid. You wouldn't be listening to this video if you didn't care about your kid. And this is one of the only times in your child's life when they're going to have an entire team of experts that are dedicated to coming up with solutions on how to make your child's life successful and how they can develop the skills that are necessary to be a functioning individual, not just in school, but for the rest of their lives. And so I challenge you, if you do not like IEP meetings, think of it differently. You like your kid, and you want them to have these skills for themselves, right? Okay, even if you don't want them to have the skills for you, do you really want to be sitting on your porch 20 years from now and being like, hey, why doesn't Johnny have this skill? Oh, yeah, you know what? we wanted to, that IEP meeting was going a little bit long, and I really didn't want to deal with that. So, okay, that makes sense. Johnny can live the rest of his life without these skills. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. And so it's really important that you end up going to this IEP meeting and participating in it in a meaningful way, and that we actually end up including in it a complete understanding and portrait of your child so that we can formulate something that addresses the problems and that addresses them in an effective way. If your child does not have a disability, you have zero rights to enforce the school to give your child an education. You have no recourse whatsoever. But under the IDEA, a parent is actually given the right to participate. And this is something that's interesting because when you're sitting at that IEP table, you actually are a fully equal team member. There's nobody that's above anyone else there. And ultimately, as a parent, you have all the power in an IEP situation. It cannot be approved if you do not approve it. Everything has to go through you. Now, something that's important for parents to do at this meeting is to provide an accurate snapshot of your child. We want to make sure that the IEP team fully understands what it is that they're dealing with. Now, what this ends up meaning is that you want to be able to give a description of your child that not only includes the problems that you end up having, but that also focuses on their strengths. We want to know, if your child's motivated to do things for this reason, if they really like something, if they some type of, they love reading, and when something's given to them when they have to read, it's easier than if they are seen in a classroom. Or maybe they need to have an audiobook, or they need to be able to hear things and instructions by, instead of having them written down. You're going to want to get all this information out. Now, one of the things that is important to understand is that when you're at this IEP meeting, you can bring anyone with you, as long as they have familiarity with the child. You're also allowed to bring an advocate. I go to IEP meetings all the time, and what these additional team members can do is really bring to the table some additional perspectives. I mean, just imagine if your child has a very successful environment in Little League or at Sunday school, and everything goes on perfectly there. But at school, you're just seeing major problems. Maybe it would be helpful to bring that Little League coach or Sunday school teacher to that IEP meeting so they can, offer a fresh perspective on what works. That way we can learn from different environments. The courts have said that an IEP needs to be developed at the meeting. It can't be predetermined. And so if you end up going to an IEP meeting, which happens all the time, where you have the team that already developed the goals, they already know what it is, and they just want to have a quick meeting and sign it. That's not an appropriate IEP meeting. You didn't end up being able to go through and discuss that, and it definitely isn't tailored to the unique needs of your child. Let me go through and start explaining how an IEP works, because it's going to be important for you to understand the structure of how this works. The way I describe it is, imagine that the IEP is a pyramid. Now, the pyramid has a base, and it's natural that a base of a pyramid has to be all-encompassing, because if there was an additional part of the pyramid, it wouldn't have a base if it went larger. And so you need to make sure that that base of the IEP, the documentation of the qualifying disability, ends up being fully incorporated. A lot of times IEP team members in schools will end up deciding that as long as the kid qualifies for an IEP, it's okay. Johnny has ADHD, but he also has autism. We already have autism in there. We're going to go ahead and leave it. Well, that's not a good thing to do, because in order to have that qualifying disability in that IEP pyramid, they had to do evaluations. They had to go through and understand the nature of that disability. But if Johnny has, the team has a full understanding of his autism, or more likely just an understanding, but then they know nothing about the way that his ADD ends up impacting his life, it's going to make it very difficult for the team to end up making an appropriate IEP. They're going to be basically wearing a blindfold and shooting in the dark. Now, there's a reason why dart players don't wear blindfolds. It doesn't make sense. This is an important issue. We want to understand everything that we can about this, about your child before we go into this. Now, after we end up doing that, we end up going into something called the present levels of performance, also known as the PLOP, P-L-O-P. And in this is when, like I said, you're going to end up going through and you're going to be describing your child. We're going to talk about what can he currently, he or she can currently do in this environment. Does he have the ability to read? Does she have the ability to form appropriate relationships with her peers? Is there a speech delay? What is that speech delay? Usually these end up being technical things. You end up saying that a child has 15% accuracy at this or 30% doing this. And you have all these technical terms that end up going through. But one thing that you need to also do as a parent is you're not a technical person and you're not expected to be putting in statistics about how often your child ends up doing something. What you need to do is give an accurate picture of, well, what is it they do? And if you end up hearing something where they say, well, this kid doesn't know how to use, doesn't know how to ask appropriate follow-up questions. They don't know how to ask how, what that is, how, why. But if you ended up seeing that at home, you need to include that, because otherwise you're going to end up seeing an IEP goal that's just useless. They already have that skill. Let's focus on the actual things that they need to do. And the way that you do that is by making sure that you give that accurate picture. Now, one of the things I say is that you need to develop strengths and weaknesses. When a person has a disability, they end up figuring out different ways to deal with it. Ways that, when I end up writing, when I end up thinking, because of the nature of my disability, I think differently. And that's a good thing. I mean, it's something that I've developed in 30 years and something that ends up making me stronger and more creative. And so what you need to do is figure out how to find that for your child. And so when you have a weakness that's described, what I really want you to do is think about what's the strength that corresponds with that. How can we help this child work on something that's difficult with something that they do well in? And if you end up pairing these weaknesses and strengths, you're going to end up being able to use those in the rest of the IEP to develop a success plan. After the levels of present performance, this is when we end up getting into IEP goals. And IEP goals are going to be the things that we're going to end up working on. You're going to want to make sure that the goals end up actually being something that's important to you. They're things that your child needs right now, but more importantly, they're the types of skills that your child's going to need for the rest of their life. And so, even though you may not understand in the same way that a speech therapist understands things or an occupational therapist, you don't have their degrees. But what you do know is what it is that you want to get for your child. And if you end up focusing on that and you end up asking follow-up questions, so they end up having a goal that ends up saying, okay, the child's going to do this, this, and that over consecutive trials with these benchmarks of percentages of accuracy. Who knows what that means? Ask a question. Ask, okay, well, we're having a problem with this. How does that goal relate to it? What am I going to see out of that? Where are we going with this? What's the long-term plan of where we're headed? And really trying to keep that long-term perspective. Is this child going to graduate from high school? Is this child going to go to college? Keeping those things in mind. Or is this child going to have vocational school? Is this child going to need around-the-clock care for the rest of their life? What are the things that work and are tailored towards that end? Now, after that, we're going to end up going into descriptions of the service providers that are required to implement this. The number of speech therapy sessions, who's going to end up doing the goals. And you have the descriptions of all of that information. After that, you end up having accommodations. Now, accommodations are something that I would really want to challenge you on. An accommodation is basically saying your child can't do something, therefore we're going to do it differently. Now, what that ends up meaning is that the school's not going to be working on that thing. And so, for example, when I was in law school, I ended up having an accommodation that ended up giving me longer time to do my tests. Now, what that means is that the law school was saying, hey, we're not going to teach Mark how to work in timed environments. We're going to just go ahead and give him this artificial environment that gives him a little more extra time. That helped me out tremendously, and it was a good thing. But even though it was easier and it was helpful, it probably would have been helpful to learn how to do things a little quicker. If you have an accommodation that's been put in place, it's not going to be worked on. And so you really want to challenge those accommodations and ask yourself, is this something that the child should be working on? And tailor that accommodation to be as thin as possible, to be focusing on the essential skills and things that the child doesn't have right now. So now I'm going to get into the actual nuts and bolts of this presentation. One of the things that parents end up saying all the time is that it's like a foreign language that people are speaking at IEP setting. You know, you end up having all these professionals. I mean, I've been to IEP meetings where we've had as many as 20 individuals that were there. And so you have all of these medical practitioners, specialists, and then they give reports. They use huge words. They start talking about standard deviations. They start talking about technical terms on the gait or different things about your child that you don't understand. What you need to do is always remember that if you don't understand something, someone else at that table probably doesn't understand. You're going to end up having a million words that are brought up that you're going to have no clue what they end up meaning. Parents end up saying that it sounds like a foreign language when they're in an IEP. And there's pros and cons of this jargon that occurs. It's important to use technical terms. It's important to be precise. It's important for you to end up getting the benefit of the specialist education. But it's also important that you understand what it is that's being said. And so to do this, we're going to start before the IEP meeting. We're going to want you to learn more about your child's disability. How are you going to do this? Opening up a Wikipedia article, read about, just the encyclopedia's definition of what it is that your child has. And, keep in mind that Wikipedia is something that is edited by common people. It's not something that's a perfect resource, but you'd be surprised at how good Wikipedia can be. If you end up going on Wikipedia, you're going to get the basic definitions, you're going to have explanations of what something is, and you're going to have a broad overview. Now, one of the cool things about Wikipedia is that if you go down on the page to the bottom, you're going to end up having resources that end up citing, where did that information come from? And those resources can be really good, especially if there's a part of that article that you really enjoyed and that it was something that you wanted to know more about. After you end up exploring some of those resources and you end up reading the Wikipedia article, what I want you to do is try to look for very reputable websites that are dedicated to people who have this disability. Let's imagine that your child has ADD. If you end up putting in ADD, ADHD in a Google search, you're going to end up having a bunch of sponsored sites. It says sponsored right in the top. Skip those. You're not ready for that stuff yet. We're going to go down further. You're going to go down and you're going to see below those sponsored sites, you're going to see .orgs. And you search for ADD, and one of the top sites that you're going to find is CHADD, CHADD.org. And what CHADD is children and adults with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And CHADD is an organization that is going to end up having on that website a bunch of videos, resources, articles. It's going to have just a whole bunch of curated things that are specifically tailored to individuals with that disability. Those resources are going to be written in such a way that are a little bit more like an expert. And they can be trusted a little bit more than just the internet as a whole. You're going to end up seeing things like links to other websites. Those are going to be good links. They're going to be something that's been approved by this national organization. They're going to have newsletters you can sign up for. They may end up having some type of an association that you could sign up for. Maybe they have workshops that you can go to, conferences. Those are going to be helpful, and they're all ways that you could learn more about your child's disability. Now, don't get overwhelmed. I mean, it doesn't mean just because you're doing research on this doesn't mean you have to go to a bunch of national conferences. But you could. I mean, it's something that you could do. But what you're trying to do is just understand what's going on. Now, all of us are different types of learners. Some of us end up needing basic stuff. We just need a layman's perspective, explaining to me how something is done. Others of us are engineers or scientists, and maybe reading a medical book about how your child's disability ends up being described would be helpful for you. However it is that you learn, you want to use that technique. You can also talk to other people. You can talk to your child's teacher. You can talk to their pediatrician. You can talk to any therapist. Anyone in your child's life that has offered to be a resource to you about that disability. And you can ask them questions. You can ask other parents questions about, hey, I don't understand this or that. And they offer really good advice from a parent perspective. In Utah, there's a Facebook group called Autism Moms. It's an amazing resource where parents, moms and dads end up going on and asking questions and saying, hey, my child's having a difficult time doing this or that. Can you explain to me what this is? And they go through and answer those. And that's really helpful. I'm going to explain to you something that's a negotiation term. It comes from the book Getting to Yes, the one I mentioned earlier. And I have a link in the description where you can go ahead and buy it. My background and what I really enjoy is in negotiation. The first things that you find out when you study negotiation is that this book, Getting to Yes, is basically the Bible for negotiation, whether you're dealing with a multi-international dispute to all the way at the other end of the spectrum if you're dealing with family therapy and a problem. That this book ends up basically giving all of the definitions that are used in the industry. They literally wrote the Bible on it. One of the things that they include in this book is something that is interesting. It's the idea of considering your interests before your positions. Now, let me explain what this means. First, we're going to look at the word interest. An interest is why. It's the problem. So in my case, when I ended up saying that I went to my law school and I was asking for an accommodation on my writing, I had an interest in being a better writer. My interest wasn't in getting a faculty member to review my writing. It was in being a better writer. It was the need. And so maybe your child has social skills that you want to work on. The need for those social skills would be the interest. Now, with interest, we end up going through in a negotiation or in an IEP setting here, we're going to end up going and we're going to give solutions. Your solution to satisfy the interest is going to be your position. And that's going to be, okay, we're going to have a social skills program. We're going to have extended time on a test. Whatever it ends up being, it's the way that it ends up being solved. A lot of times parents end up getting frustrated in IEPs and things break down. The thing that I would end up saying to you is, if you feel hostility, if you feel like things aren't going well, they're not fluid, ask yourself, did I put the position before the interest? Am I advocating that some solution end up being given, but not really talking about why? If you focus on the interest, you're going to have the entire team, all the team members working towards satisfying that interest. And guess what? You don't know everything. At this table, you're going to have a general education teacher who went to school to learn how to be a teacher. Afterwards, they ended up getting their credential. You're going to have a special education teacher. They probably end up having some type of an advanced master's degree, if not a doctorate. That is taught them tons of things about being a special education teacher that you don't understand. You're going to end up having a speech therapist maybe, an occupational therapist. they went and did advanced degrees in this stuff. And you're going to want their input. They're going to be able to give and come up with better solutions because of their education than they would have if they didn't have that education. And the way that you get them to, and you're able to unlock that education, is by focusing on your interests. I have this need. I need it to be solved. Please help me solve this. And then when they end up coming up with solutions, and they say, okay, we're going to do X, Y, or Z, what I need you to do is ask yourself, did that satisfy the interest? Maybe you even bring it up and you say to the team, hey, does that satisfy the interest that we were bringing up? And if it does, then that's great. You can move on to the next interest. You're going to want to make sure that it actually solves a problem. Before you held the IEP meeting, you should sit down. Maybe it's with you, your significant other, could be with a friend. I want you to think about what it is that we want to accomplish in the IEP meeting. What are your interests? And so maybe you end up having an interest in making sure that your child's speech is more understandable and more functional. Maybe you have a social problem that you need to be addressed. Maybe we want to focus on transitions and make those an easier time. I want you to make a list, and I want you to think about it. I want you to think hard about it. I want you to ask yourself, okay, what is it theoretically that my child needs and would benefit? And also, when you're considering that, like I said, keep that long-term perspective and think about what is it that my child's going to need in the long run, and are there some baby steps that need to occur to get to that point? If you don't focus on that long run, no one else is going to do it. I mean, maybe you're going to get lucky and you're going to have a good IEP team, but schools are, overworked, and they have a lack of resources, and they have an immediate problem. They have a problem of how do we offer an education to this child? And so they're probably going to be focusing on the immediate needs. I need you to focus on those, but then also keep in mind the long term. So you're going to develop this list of interests. I'm going to want you to actually bring that into the IEP meeting. And you're going to know why. So we're going to have an interest. We're going to say, okay, we have an interest in making sure that social skills get developed. I want you to write next to it, why? Why do you have that need? Well, okay, our daughter is having difficulty maintaining relationships. This is impacting her negatively in that she's not being able to benefit from having appropriate peer relationships. She doesn't have friends. And so she's not learning how to collaborate. She's not dealing with problem solving on the playground. And that maybe this is impacting her self-esteem, and that, we're seeing behavior issues that are coming out of that. Understanding why you have that interest and actually sharing that with the team is going to make it so that the team's going to go, oh, you know what? Yeah, that does make sense. But if you end up saying, oh, we need a social skills program, they're just going to say like, wow, you know what? That seems expensive. There's resources that are going to be wasted on this or whatever because, we're seeing problems in math and science or whatever it is. What you're going to be able to do by developing this is that you're going to be able to say, no, this is the reason why. I'm giving you a parent's perspective on what this is. And you're going to be able to get that team to add to it. Maybe they end up seeing ways that your daughter is being negatively affected in their classroom because of social issues. Maybe there's a problem with behavior. When she tries to make a friend, she ends up getting frustrated because she doesn't have the words to do it. And so maybe there's some hitting that occurs. And whatever it is that you're looking for, get the input of the team. Ask them. Try to engage with them. Be a team member. You don't want to be an individual who's demanding. You want to be working with them. Before the meeting, you've developed this list of interests. One of the things that you're going to want to do after this, you're going to want to go into the meeting with an understanding of what is it I'm going to do if I can't get this done. Now, in negotiation, and going back to getting to yes, we end up having something that's called a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. simple terms is, what am I going to do? What's my plan B if we can't agree? You have things going into an IEP that you can do even if you can't get the school to do them. And by knowing that, you're going to end up going into that meeting from a position of strength. You're going to know what to do if things don't go wrong. And so you're not going to be desperate. There's other ways that this problem can be solved. We don't need to exhaust and fight a battle here. We can actually just try, and then I can do something else. And so one of those things that you can do is you can ask for an independent evaluation. You can put in a request and ask the school, hey, you know what? You're saying that we don't have this information, or that my child doesn't qualify for this program because the testing and evaluations didn't give that information. Well, you have the right to ask for the school to allow you to have another person evaluate that, an independent person from the school district. And what you'll end up doing is submitting a letter and ask them, hey, I want to have an independent evaluation. These are the things that I want them to evaluate. To either say, yes, we agree with you, and we're going to fund that, and we're going to have you go and find this other evaluator, or they can deny it. And if they deny it, then they basically have to go and take you to an administrative court. They have to do something called a due process hearing. It's actually a pretty difficult thing to do. It involves lawyers. It doesn't have to involve lawyers, but usually it does. It's a legit court proceeding. And school districts, if you ended up giving a good reason why this evaluation is necessary, are going to end up wanting to avoid these situations. It's not something that they want to waste resources on because, maybe you made a good point on why this is necessary. And that hearing officer is going to end up, agreeing with you. And so there's a good chance that they're going to agree. Or maybe they'll go, hey, you know what? Maybe we do have the information here that, to get that program put in place. And maybe you'll end up not needing it. It's important to understand that. One thing to keep in mind about that is that the school they are required to accept the input that you bring from, maybe there's a medical diagnosis or a report that was written through your doctor or a specialist. They do need to review that information, but they don't, ultimately, that's all they have to do. They just need to consider it. And it may end up meaning that they end up having a legal obligation that arises that they need to be doing additional evaluations, but they don't need to accept your diagnosis as the end of it. Now, another thing that you can go into an IEP meeting knowing is that you have something called the stay put provision. Stay put is awesome. Stay put means that if you do not agree to sign that IEP, the old IEP stays in effect. And so whatever it said, like my child has 5 hours of speech a week, the school wanted to lower it to 3. Whatever those changes are, if the IEP is not accepted and you don't sign it, that old IEP stays into effect. And so you can know going into that meeting, you don't need to sign it. At worst, we can just keep what's there right now. And hopefully it's a good thing. But at least the reason why you're not signing it is because you think that was better than this. And so it's something that's going to give you a position of power. Now, you are able to also fund a proper placement privately. And so let's think about autism. I used to be an ABA therapist for a while. In ABA therapy, it's just revolutionized the way that we think about autism. And it's very, if you have a child that has autism, you probably have heard about it. It stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis. Basically, it ends up being that we're going to train a child to gain skills by using repetitive, what they call discrete trials. So we're just going to have a bunch of different events where we ask them to do some type of skill, and we're going to do this, hundreds, if not thousands of times. And then we're going to track it, and we're going to incrementally increase it. ABA therapy was incredible incredible to autism when it came about. And the reason why it was developed and where it was developed, it wasn't developed in the school systems. In fact, it's barely even getting into school systems now. It was developed in the private world. It was developed by people that could afford to, do something that was experimental, because it was experimental. Even though they were making gains, it took years and years and years for it to be peer reviewed. The reason why I'm explaining this is I want you to understand that 15 years ago, 10 years ago, if that parent would have went and funded a private placement for their child to get ABA, it may have been that the school district's not liable to reimburse them for that. But they would now, maybe, because there's been peer review. This has been developed. It's moved, and it's an actual science at this point that has recognition. And at some point, it went from being experimental to being to being an accepted, peer-reviewed format. And it's important to keep this in mind, because you're going to end up seeing, like I said, there's a lot of sponsored links when you type in your child's disability. And so you're going to see all kinds of things that people are doing, and maybe you'll see huge success stories. But the thing that's important to keep in mind is that if you're advocating for something that is different, not being offered, and something that's cutting edge, that it may not be something that your child is entitled to. The last thing that you can do is if you don't agree with the IEP, you can file something called a due process hearing. And a due process hearing is, like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a mini trial. And you're going to end up presenting why you think the school should be doing something and why it's proper. And then the school's going to present the alternate viewpoint. And then an administrative judge or hearing officer is going to listen to it, and then they're going to make a ruling. And they're actually going to submit an opinion. You can go on the Department of Education's website and you can read them. And now, this is a little bit outside the scope of this presentation. My focus in my practice is on how to avoid litigation and how to find a solution. What I will say, though, on this is that if you move into this area, do it carefully. Like I said, my experience in law school ended up showing me that when you end up having some type of a litigation, things get a little hairy sometimes. And it may end up being that the relationship can suffer. So you want to consider that. And also, you're going to want to consult an attorney at that point, because you're going to be at a major disadvantage if you don't have representation. The school's definitely going to have representation at that. Now we end up having our BATNA. This is, we know what our plan B is. And now we're going to end up going into, okay, is this an appropriate, where is the IEP meeting going to occur? Is it an appropriate place at an appropriate time? So if you end up having a meeting where you know that there are going to be 15 different people involved, perhaps your child's pediatrician has told you that he could be there for the meeting, but it had to occur at a certain time. You're going to want to make sure that that IEP meeting is put at a time that is going to be able to allow you to have those resources available. You're going to want to make sure that if there's a very large amount of issues that need to be discussed, that we know that maybe an hour-long IEP meeting isn't going to be appropriate. So you want to make sure that you have a proper time. Proper place. Okay, how many people are going to be there? Is the room big enough? Is the room in the back of a special ed room where there's going to be a classroom going on? Is this going to be a room that is going to be conducive towards having a good discussion? If it's not, you can suggest different rooms. You really don't have the ability to mandate that an IEP occur at a certain place, but if you give a good suggestion, it's probably going to be received. So now we're going to want to talk about what is it that you're going to do to make sure that you have a trusting relationship between you and your child's school. Now, like I shared with you in my story, in law school, I ended up having a bunch of distrust that was brought up against me. Even though I won, I ended up having problems where people were concerned that maybe I was going to be a problem maker, that there's liability in this. That had to do with the fact that they didn't trust me. It wasn't that I was acting inappropriately. I mean, I even had professors that were telling me that that's what I needed to do. But it ended up being that the way that I did it ended up making a problem. And it ended up making it so that even when I got a solution for it, it made things really difficult. And so you're going to want to, the way I could have done it, and the way I did, is that going to the dean, talking to him, and establishing trust. We ended up saying and agreeing with each other on why it is that we were making these decisions that may have seemed irrational to both. I mean, they did seem irrational to us before then. And so then we finally had a trusting relationship. How can you get a trusting relationship with your school? Maybe things have been bad. Maybe things have been heated. What can you do to repair that? Well, let's consider what would have happened if maybe one day you end up coming to school to pick up your kid, and she has a torn shirt. Now, let's ask how we're going to appropriately deal with this. Now, you could go ahead and be mad and be like, wait, what happened? There's a brand new shirt. And get mad at the teacher over it. Maybe you find out that your daughter ended up getting into an argument with somebody and that her shirt got ripped. You could accuse the other kid as being a bully and put all the blame on them. Well, when you do that, you're going to end up raising defensive walls. When those walls go up, the teacher's going to end up explaining, hey, why it's not that big of a deal, why she didn't maybe ended up doing things right, maybe defending the other kid, and you're not going to get anything that's helpful. Now, instead of this, if you would have been focusing on developing a trusting relationship, you could have started to work on communication, and you could have shown up, you see the torn shirt, and you could have said, hey, it looks like my child had a tough day today. Could you tell me what happened? And maybe you end up finding out that on the playground, maybe your child had been trying to join a game of tag, and that she just didn't know how to do that. And, it was a great thing that she's trying to engage in that social interaction, but she was unsuccessful, and that got her mad. And so maybe she had done something that ended up instigating the other child, and that there was something more than just some bully that was on the playground. Now, if you understood that information, you could then have a discussion with the teacher about, how do we get those social skills that are in place so that she can play tag with her peers? What could we do to deal with problem solving so that she doesn't get into a fight when she doesn't have that communication? Is there perhaps some type of a protocol where she could go and talk to the teacher? What is it that we can do to make her life more successful? You could go home, you could talk to your daughter, you can gain more information, gain more understanding about what it is that made her frustrated, and you can actually try to prevent that again. Now, that's going to be good for your child, but it's also going to be really good for your relationship with your child's school. You're going to be seen as somebody that's rational, somebody that can work with, somebody that's not causing problems, somebody that listens before they accuse. And that teacher's going to like you more. Quite frankly, most parents aren't that involved in their children's education. It's just sort of reality. The fact that you're watching this probably means that you're in the top 1% of parents that really care about their kids. And it's frustrating being a teacher in that type of environment. And it's refreshing when a parent comes in and engages and really respects you. And so if you show that respect, you're going to end up getting so much further ahead. Now, one of the other things that's important about building trust is we're going to consider when you end up going into a meeting and you have some interests that you want to have satisfied, and you have some great idea that you want to get implemented. If you end up going in and you make a unilateral demand where it's just one way, you're demanding that something occur, that's going to put up walls again. It's going to end up causing it so that trusting relationship isn't there. And so what's going to happen is you're going to look like someone who's not a team member. You're going to look like somebody that doesn't value or respect the education of the other team members, that doesn't give it respect to what they do and what they can bring at the table. And it's going to end up making it so that you're going to be fighting over resources. You're going to be like those two girls with the orange, where they're going to end up fighting over, right and wrong on this. And you're not going to be able to go through and find out, okay, well, how can we both win on this? Because you won't have the trust to do that. Now, one of the ways that you end up doing that is by getting the entire IEP team to buy into the solution. Develop it, work together, start at the beginning, make sure that you have the base of the pyramid set up before you move on to the next level. And so if you ended up walking through that process and using the IEP team and all of the resources that are there, and if you come up together for the solution, that solution is going to be able to be obtained without putting up walls, because those walls are going to impede your child's education. It's going to be difficult. There's a famous case where it ended up getting appealed all the way up to a circuit court level, right below the Supreme Court. And in the case, the parent was making a demand. And the judge famously wrote the lines, the parent is mistaken. The child is entitled to an education, but the child is entitled to that of a serviceable Chevrolet, not a Cadillac. The parent is asking for a Cadillac. Okay, so you always have to remember this. By you coming in and asking for a Cadillac, you won't get it. You won't ever, because you're not entitled to a Cadillac. You're only entitled to a basic Chevrolet. But you know, and I know, that Cadillacs are written into IEPs all the time. Not all the time, but they exist. How do they get there? I'll tell you. The way that they get there is that the entire IEP team ended up coming together, and they ended up deciding that there was a reason why doing more made sense in this. And if they did more, maybe it would be more effective. Maybe there wouldn't need to be intervention later on. Maybe if we invested in an electronic Braille reader right now, and we ended up working on this child have the ability to read a Braille reader, maybe we're going to be able to have that Braille reader for the rest of that child's education, or as long as that Braille reader is able to work. It's by working together and talking about the interests and what it is that you want to occur and why you want to have that solution. And then getting the team to come up with those solutions and buy into it, that's how you're going to end up preventing those walls, and that's how you're going to get the most amount of resources put towards your child. Back to how you end up presenting yourself. So, like I said, the way that you show up at this meeting and the way that you show up to school in general, in all of your interactions, in every email, whatever ends up being, you are being perceived as something. And there's a definition of you. There's something that's occurring where, unfortunately, you're going to be stereotyped based upon the way that you present yourself. It's important to always be aware of this perception. How do you present yourself to your child's school? What do they think about you? And if it's something that you don't like, how can I change that? If they view me as being someone that's always bringing in problems and that it's just a headache to deal with, what can I do about it? Maybe after school I can walk up to the teacher and tell her a joke. Maybe you could invite them out, to something that you're doing in the community. Or if you know that the individual is participating in some organization or something, maybe if you were involved in with that individual and remember that they're people too, that there would be a more human connection and that they would be considering you as a peer and not a problem. Because, like I said, school teachers have a lot of problems in their lives. And so the more you can go about it in making sure that you're not perceived as a problem, then they're going to want to help you because you're making their job easier and you're making it more pleasant. And so some other things that you can do on perception is pay attention to the way you talk. Maybe you're loud. Maybe you talk, when you get excited, you end up sounding like you're yelling. That's not helpful. It ends up making walls go up. Maybe you aren't mad. Maybe that's not what you want to occur, but that's what you're doing. And if you pay attention to that and you do a self-check, hey, would I like somebody to be, how would I be treating myself if this is the way that I was being talked to? You're going to be able to adjust that. It basically goes back to the golden rule. Treat other people the way you want to be treated. And if you do this, you're going to be cultivating those necessary prerequisites that are going to allow you to get the most for your kid. Now, another thing that you're going to want to pay attention to is the way that you present yourself physically. How are you sitting? Are you dozing off? Do you look alert and attentive? My suggestion is take notes. Even if you're someone that doesn't take notes, if you take notes when as the school psychologist is giving a presentation on results and you're taking notes, well, it ends up making it so that you look like you care and that their words matter. And by giving them that, you're gaining their trust that you want the benefit of their education. And they're going to want to give you more of that. And so some other things you may want to consider is what you wear. This is an important event. You're dealing with the future of your child's life. Like I said, there's probably not going to be another time after your child graduates where they're going to have the same level of professionals all sitting at a table to find these solutions. How important do you consider that? And then are you conveying the level of importance that you put on that in what you wear? You wouldn't show up to an interview for a job wearing jeans and a t-shirt. And I'm not telling you that you should be dressed, that a parent shouldn't be able to go to an IEP meeting in jeans and a t-shirt. But it does say something about the casualness of your dress may end up making the meeting seem casual and not important. But if you end up wearing something, I'm not saying wear a tuxedo, but if you end up wearing something that's nice, it ends up showing that you care. You're offering respect to the other individual, and you're setting the tone for the meeting. Now, there's an interesting practice that's had a great impact in my life personally. But something that's growing in popularity is the concept of mindfulness. And there's a lot of different things that mindfulness is defined as, and something I'd highly encourage you to go and gain more information about. But in essence, mindfulness is about leaving the past in the past and being present. So when I'm talking to you, that you're not thinking about what occurred in the past. you're thinking about what I'm telling you. Now, I'm not saying you don't use this stuff from the past when you're mindful. I'm saying that you're alert, you're attentive, you're using your eyes, you're using your ears, you're fully engaged in the moment, and you're aware of your surroundings. Now, if you end up doing this, you're going to end up being a more active listener, and you're going to be more engaged. But then also, one of the things is that these are stressful events. And when you end up going to an IEP meeting, you're going to have feelings. You're going to get mad maybe. You're going to get sad. You're going to get embarrassed. Whatever it ends up being that occurs, you're going to have these feelings. Now, what we know about feelings is that feelings express themselves through actions. And a lot of these actions aren't things that you really are even aware of. And so if you have a feeling you're feeling uncomfortable, you're feeling embarrassed, you're feeling angry, whatever it is, if you end up being aware of that feeling when it happens in the meeting, you can ask yourself, hey, well, why am I feeling this way? Maybe there's been something that needs to change. Or maybe this just is a difficult situation that's hard to talk about. But more importantly, you can observe that feeling. You can label it, like, I'm frustrated. What am I going to do about it? If that decision is, I'm not going to, we're doing what we need to do, then you can say, okay, I'm frustrated. That's okay. I don't need to let that frustration come out in the way I present myself. And if you do this, you're going to be really helping, because if you understand your feelings, if you understand those frustrations and you label them, you get to decide how you react to them. You're not allowing your subconscious to control this. You're allowing yourself to control the destiny of your child. And that's important. That's really important that you do. Getting to Yes has to be one of the most interesting and important books that I've read on negotiation and problem solving. And one of the things that the authors end up saying in that book is you have to be hard on the problem, not on the people. And so this really comes back to the idea of the fact that you're an IEP team member. You're an equal. They're an equal. Everybody deserves respect. And it's okay to be hard on a problem without being hard on the other people at the table. You don't want to burn bridges. You don't want to cause problems and attack somebody because they ended up saying something you don't like. That's going to make it so that the problem, the way that you dealt with the problem, is going to end up being more of a problem than the initial problem itself. And ultimately, you have to always keep in mind, always remind yourself, this is about your child. We're trying to help my child get through their education, to get the skills that they need. Is the way that I am treating the other team members helping that or hurting it? And so you can go and, let's say that, using my example of the way that I dealt with my writing requirement, I could be, arguing that, hey, somebody doesn't know the law. I'm right, you're wrong. And maybe I am right. And I think I was right. My law professors thought I was right. But the attorney from the law school thought that he was right too, for a different reason. And I could attack them for having that position and saying, wait a second, that's ridiculous. Why would you think that way? But then I'm basically calling him an idiot. And that's not cool. Nobody likes being called an idiot. And it's not helpful. Instead, what I should have done right away was focus on, okay, well, why? Well, what's going on? Let's talk about it. And then we could have been focusing on the problem instead of the people that were involved in it. And it's always by focusing on the problem that we're going to find solutions, because believe me, if you are having difficulty in IEP team meeting, or if you're having hostility that's occurring, it's my guess that you're focusing on the drama and the Jerry Springer of the event instead of focusing on your child. Always remember yourself. Be the better person. Think about it. Even if somebody else is, maybe attacking in some way, or they say something that you find insulting, ask yourself, is it helpful to my child to react to this in the way that I'm going to react, and control that reaction? And then go back to that, so you have the problem. You've done your homework. You know why this problem needs to be solved. If you knew why, and you share why, and you don't focus on how, you're going to end up getting to a better place, because you're focusing on group problem solving, and having 5 minds work on a problem is always going to be more helpful than a single individual, so long as that team, those 5 people, are actually working together. So work together, be a team member. One of the things that you always have to ask yourself is, okay, so we know the interests and we know what the problem is. We don't want to know, so there's been a solution, there's been a goal, there's been a service, there's an accommodation, whatever it ends up being, that's been given. Why is it being given? Ask yourself that. Ask yourself, does this satisfy my interests? Did it work? I mean, is this solution going to be a helpful one? Is it appropriate? Is it going to be helpful? Is it going to work? Ask yourself, hey, was this solution found right now because we're running out of time? People are maybe falling asleep. People are getting fidgety. We just need to get out of here. It's not going to be a very objective way to make a problem. Like I said, you don't want to be on your front porch when you're 50 or 60, 70 and ask yourself, well, why didn't my kid get these skills? Oh, we were running late in that IEP meeting. It's a terrible reason to decide the way that your child's going to receive an education. Now, one of the things that you can also do is ask, so if you end up having a solution that's given to you, you have to remember you have experts that are at that table. You can ask them to explain to you why that solution's appropriate. You can ask them to explain some of the science behind it. You can ask them, is this a peer-reviewed thing? And so let's go back to the ABA example for someone with autism. It may end up being where they end up saying, oh, we agree with ABA. We agree that your child ends up needing it, but there's another way that we can do this. We don't need to do a full ABA program. We can do some shortened, condensed version of this by just training the teacher in some aspect to do a component of that. Well, you have the right to know, you can know that ABA has been peer-reviewed, it's been identified as being appropriate, and you can ask them, well, okay, has this been peer-reviewed? Has it been studied? Or are you offering an experimental way to do this? Are you actually, is the school offering this a solution that has been time-tested and approved? It's important to remember that. And to always remember and just think, why is it that we came to this solution? And you can do that quick. You don't need to always bring it out, but just ask. Now, like I said earlier, IEP team meetings are basically, just imagine, you're basically at a UN meeting where you end up having all of these different people from different backgrounds that are all sitting together and talking about one thing, but there's no common language that's appropriate or obvious to occur here. My preference would be that everyone was talking in layman's perspective, but that's not the way that experts work all the time. And maybe it's helpful to the other experts to hear that expert word and that they're on the same page. But because you're a team member, you need to stop and ask. If you don't know what something means, find out why. If something's important enough that somebody shared it, you should understand what it is that was being shared. And I mean, I know that this can be something that may be time consuming or that, may sound like it may be embarrassing to do. But like I said, remember, it's about your child. And if you understand the evaluations, the observations, that you're going to be able to make better decisions. And, you may be concerned that this is going to be, constantly stopping and interrupting is going to be a huge time waster. Well, I challenge you on the idea. Think about this, that if you end up stopping and ask questions because somebody's using big words, maybe they're going to stop using those words and they're going to just automatically explain it to you. Things are going to go faster because you stopped and asked, because you're training the team. You're explaining to them, hey, I give you respect. I want to know what you mean. Asking it in a nice way and a caring way and being like, oh, can you explain what that means? It ends up showing, that you value their contribution to the team. And they're going to end up being better for it. Now, it's important, remember, it's okay not to know. Even if you do all of the research, you're not going to know things. And when you don't know, you need to stop and ask. One of the things that's often happens in IEP team meetings is we end up discussing things that are embarrassing for parents. Look, the fact of the matter is, some people may not tell you this, but I think if you're in a situation where your child's disability has had a large impact on the way that you engage in life. Maybe your child has frequent outbursts in social situations that are difficult. Maybe you end up having some behaviors like having hitting that occurs. That's difficult for a parent to experience. And it's also difficult for other people to experience. And so when you end up being in an IEP team meeting, and let's say your child has ADD, and your child's running around the room, not listening, maybe they're hitting, you're going to feel embarrassed. And what I would challenge you to do is never apologize. You can apologize at different times outside of the meeting, but this is the time where you need to understand why that's occurring. And if you allow that apology to shut down the conveyance of that information, you're causing a bigger problem than if you just sat and listened. I know that's difficult, but the stakes are high. You need to know why this is occurring. And you need to understand it's okay. It's okay for your kid to be hyper and not listen and to maybe hit or bite, because that's what happens. That's what happens to a lot of these kids. Those are typical experiences. There's no need to feel bad that your child's engaging in life the way that is expected for somebody with that condition. But there is a way to get through that stuff. And there are behavior plans and there are, coping skills and things that can occur. But if you just sit and say, oh, I'm sorry, I should have done this, I should have done that, and you take on all the blame on yourself, you're impeding the rest of the team in offering, well, let's describe what is the solution to do that. And if you end up having, a team member that maybe they end up saying, oh, well, I think that you guys need to be doing more at home. Okay, maybe that is the case, but I challenge that person and, okay, I can do more at home, but what can we do? Can you describe to me what I need to be doing at home? Can you describe to me what we're going to be doing in school to address that? We have a problem. We have an interest. We have an interest in solving this problem. How are we going to do it? And the best way you're going to do that, like I said, is don't let the embarrassment impede the finding of the solution. Stay focused on your child and not on yourself. Stay unselfish. Now, one of the funnest things that I love, just a cute little idea that I came up with, was get an IEP buddy. An IEP buddy is another parent in your kid's school, or maybe a different school, that has a kid in special education. And what I want you to do is start attending each other's meetings. And I want you to go to each other's meetings, and before the meetings, I want you to gain information about the child. Maybe you end up being at that meeting before, and you end up helping this person identify the interests and get prepared. But then if you prepare together, you're practicing to prepare. So you're going to be able to have another set of eyes, and you're going to be able to gain from that experience, so that when you're doing it for yourself, now you have 2 times that you've done it. And then when you go to the IEP meeting for them, and maybe they're getting embarrassed, maybe they're apologizing, you can help them out and you can remind them, because it's difficult. It's difficult to do these things. You can be like, oh, okay, well, how do we find a solution? You can pull back, because it's easier when you're not the person involved. It's difficult to be the parent in these situations. And so by having an IEP buddy and by participating in more IEPs, you're going to make your IEP experience better. I know that it's like pulling teeth, and it sounds weird for me to say that the way to get over your fear of pulling teeth is to go pull all your teeth, but it's not. What you need to do is remember, this isn't pulling teeth. It's a good experience, and it's an important experience. And the more you understand it, the more you're going to get from it. I challenge you, always be the best team member. Always be active. Engage the other team members. If you see somebody that's falling asleep, it happens all the time. I've seen lots of people doze in an IEP meeting. Maybe ask them a question. Don't confront them. Be nice. Don't be afraid to ask for a break. And just make sure that everybody's in an environment that's conducive to solving a major problem that's important. Never let the clock dictate an IEP. If the IEP team meeting starts breaking down, you end up having people that are falling asleep. You end up having a fight that occurs. If you end up having something that is just hostile, it's okay to ask for a break. If you feel pressure about something and you want to talk to, maybe your spouse isn't at the meeting and you want to give them a call and ask them, go ahead and ask. Maybe you're there with your spouse or your mother or someone, and then you want to talk to each other about what's going on, but in a private setting. It's okay. Go outside and have a little discussion. Be nice about it, but it's okay. It's important. If you've done all the other things that I've told you, the team's going to know that you care about this, and it's going to demonstrate that you are part of this team and that you care about it. And if you get to the end of that scheduled time and you haven't finished, and maybe you only ended up addressing 3 of the 8 areas that needed to be in this IEP, schedule another meeting. Don't rush through it. You always want to make sure that the minds and the people at the IEP are dictating its results and not the clock. It's a terrible reason to make a decision, and it ends up meaning that your child's going to suffer from it. There's no reason to let the embarrassment of scheduling and time impede that solution. So never let the clock dictate that. And the last thing I want to explain is something that school districts hate, and I don't care, and you shouldn't either. I never want you to sign that IEP at the meeting. Never. I want this to be a hard, firm rule. If you take anything from this, I need you to listen to this and do it. Never sign an IEP at the IEP meeting. Take it, be nice, and you're going to get some hostility towards this. Oh, let's just finish it. Why don't you want to do this? What's wrong? It's okay for you not to know what's wrong. It's okay for you to feel comfortable with it and not sign it right then. What I want you to do is take it home. I want you to sleep on it. I want you to maybe ask somebody else to read it. Maybe another parent. Whoever it ends up being, get another set of eyes on it. Review it. Look at it. I want you to look at the wording. I want you to see that IEP, it should be a document that's like a roadmap for your child's education. And if there were things that were discussed in that IEP and they're not in the notes, I want you to write down what should have been in the notes. And I want you to add, when you end up taking it back, I want you to say, I don't want you to sign it if there's a problem with it. I want you to give simple solutions, or at least a description of what it is that you have a problem with, and then get them to change it. I've had IEPs that have had to go through 3 or 4 different revisions afterwards that were just fine, but the notes weren't accurate. It's important to have accurate notes because at the next meeting, or if your child changes schools, whatever occurs, that those notes are going to tell you what it is that occurred so you don't need to do it again. You don't want to waste the time and effort that you put into all of this by just not having a documentation of it. Now, I just want to thank you for listening to this presentation. It's exciting for me to be able to share this stuff with you. As you can tell, I'm passionate about it. And it's something that I'm excited about sharing what I think is a unique perspective on special education. I want you to remember and understand that this isn't the whole picture. Look, problems happen, bad things happen. Sometimes schools drop the ball. Sometimes parents drop the ball. Whatever it is that occurs, it's okay to have problems. But when they come, you have to figure out what they are, and you have to overcome them. And, if you end up doing the things that I ended up talking about here today, you end up building a trusting relationship. You end up having, doing the homework that you need to do before you come in, giving respect, being a proper IEP team member. That stuff's going to pay off. And it's my guess that even if you thought maybe you needed to get a lawyer, that you need to go fight that good fight. You need to get justice. That you could probably get that solution without the fight, and you could just solve the problem. And if that's possible, do it. But if you can't solve the problem at the end, do something about it. Be the change that the world needs. Special education gets better when people end up fighting for it. And so if you need to move on and you've exhausted all of the things you can do, go get help. You can email me at any time. I'm here as a resource. My email address is mark@iep.guide. I have a blog. It's www.iep.guide. It's where I share a lot of this information. I go over and put in different posts on different things that I think would be helpful for parents. And like I said, I just want to thank you for taking this time. And if you could do one thing for me, if you found this to be a valuable resource for you, if you learned something from it, please share it with others. I want to get my message out to as many people as possible. And if you can help me by doing that, and if you can share this with others, you can be part of that revolution and that grassroots effort to completely transform the way that parents engage in special education. And it's going to matter. It's going to be important. And it's going to be something that you're going to be proud of. And as a closing, I just want to say that if you're an organization that would be, or an individual that would like to have me come out and speak to a group or a conference, I'm available. I'm also available for consultation for IEP development, and as well as representation for due process hearings. And if there's any questions, if you have any feedback you'd like to give, please give that to me. Thank you.